General Hospital spoilers for Friday, July 11th reveal that Tracy had seen enough chaos in her lifetime to recognize the signs when a storm was brewing. And as she observed the increasingly erratic behavior of Lulu and the growing tension with Brooklyn, she knew she had to speak up. Pulling Chase aside with her usual no-nonsense tone, Tracy warned him that he was walking into a minefield, one that could explode at any moment. What appeared on the surface as a petty rivalry between two women with strong personalities was, in truth, something far more dangerous. Lulu was unraveling. Her obsession with rewriting her role in Brooklyn's life, with inserting herself deeper into Chase's world, and her inability to process her own emotional trauma after her recovery were creating ripple effects that no one seemed prepared to handle. Brooklyn, on the other hand, was trying to maintain composure, to prove that she could be both a partner and a mother figure while managing her own demons. But Tracy could see the cracks forming. Every time Lulu lashed out, Brooklyn grew more defensive, more reactive, and more emotionally frayed. And in the middle of it all was Chase, trying to keep peace, trying to keep order, trying to keep everyone safe. But in doing so, he was slowly losing control of the situation and, perhaps more dangerously, of himself. Tracy's warning wasn't just about Lulu's instability. It was about the weight of responsibility that Chase was placing on his own shoulders. She reminded him that he had options. He didn't have to be the hero for everyone. Especially not at the cost of his own peace of mind. But Chase was struggling. He cared deeply for Brooklyn, yet he couldn't ignore the pull of compassion he still felt for Lulu. Especially as she began to unravel in more dramatic and unpredictable ways. Her attempts to undermine Brooklyn weren't just passive-aggressive remarks anymore. They were calculated moments of emotional sabotage, disruptive encounters, manipulative apologies, and carefully timed confessions designed to sow doubt in Chase's mind. The situation was spiraling. What started as a triangle laced with unresolved emotions was now transforming into a psychological battleground. Lulu's presence in their lives wasn't just a complication, it was a threat to the stability that Chase and Brooklyn had tried so hard to build. And Tracy, ever the strategist, could see that unless Chase made a decisive move, unless he chose to confront Lulu directly or create firmer boundaries, things would get worse. Much worse. Brooklyn, for her part, was beginning to feel the pressure. Every time Lulu was near, she could feel the air shift. Every conversation turned into a contest, every moment with Chase felt like it was being monitored, judged, twisted. And though she tried to keep her composure, tried to remind herself that Chase loved her, the seeds of doubt had been planted. That was exactly what Lulu wanted. And Tracy could see it playing out like a slow-moving tragedy. Chase was now at a crossroads. Tracy's warning had been clear: if he didn't step back and reevaluate the dynamics at play, he risked losing everything. Not just his relationship with Brooklyn, but his emotional balance, his professional standing, and perhaps even his future. Lulu's spiral wasn't going to stop on its own, and without intervention, her descent would drag everyone down with her. As Chase mulled over Tracy's words, he began to realize that the choices in front of him were no longer simple matters of the heart. They were questions of survival, emotional, relational, and personal. Would he continue trying to appease both women, hoping things would somehow settle down? Or would he confront the chaos head-on, risking heartbreak but perhaps finally finding clarity? One thing was certain: the situation was no longer sustainable, and every passing day brought the emotional powder keg closer to detonation. As Lulu sat across from Laura in the quiet of the Spencer home, the shadows of family legacy loomed larger than ever. Their conversation, meant to be a check-in between mother and daughter, quickly evolved into something deeper, something darker. The name Sunny had come up almost immediately, and with it, the weight of generations of Corinthos history. Lulu, still wrestling with her place in the web of power, protection, and pain that surrounded Port Charles, couldn't help but fixate on the idea that Sunny, always the protector, always the patriarch, was quietly spiraling as he attempted to shield everyone from the chaos closing in. But to Lulu, it wasn't just about Sunny's actions. It was about what those actions represented. A world that had consumed her family, defined her childhood, and now threatened to swallow her whole as an adult. Laura. With her calm resolve and the wisdom of someone who had seen the cycles repeat time and again, tried to gently steer the conversation toward healing. But Lulu wasn't looking for comfort, she was looking for clarity, or perhaps control, in a life that felt increasingly dictated by the decisions of men like Sunny. She spoke with a trembling voice about the illusion of safety, about how Sunny's protection often came with invisible costs. About the fear she carried not for herself but for those she loved, especially her children. Her obsession with understanding. With unraveling the mechanics of Sunny's world and the emotional damage it left in its wake, was becoming all-consuming. She wasn't just haunted by the past, she was being reshaped by it. Laura listened, her heart aching as she watched her daughter unravel under the pressure of inherited trauma. Lulu was reaching for something just out of grasp, perhaps redemption, perhaps power. Perhaps peace, and Laura feared what would happen if she couldn't find it. Sunny, meanwhile, remained unaware of the magnitude of Lulu's internal storm. His own efforts to shield his family from Sidwell's mounting threats had made him more guarded, more secretive, and that emotional distance only deepened Lulu's obsession. Every time she saw Sunny make a calculated move or issue a veiled threat in the name of protection, she felt her own identity slipping further away, trapped between loyalty to her roots and a desperate need to break free. Their conversation ended without resolution. But its weight lingered in the silence. Lulu's mind raced with images of danger, of loss, of what it meant to be a woman in a family built on violence and sacrifice. She was no longer the young, wide-eyed idealist. She had seen too much. And now, more than ever, she was determined to either change the narrative, or burn it down entirely. Laura, watching her daughter walk away with that haunted look in her eyes, knew that what came next would not be easy. Because Lulu wasn't just at odds with Sunny. She was at war with everything he represented. And the cost of that war could shatter what little remained of their fragile peace. Trina's world had always been painted in shades of caution. But she had never anticipated the betrayal would come from Kai, the one person she had begun to trust after months of silence, suspicion, and loss. It wasn't just that Kai had shared sensitive information with Drew about Jacinda's return, it was that he had done so behind closed doors. In whispered conversations and cryptic messages that Trina was never meant to discover. And when she did, it felt like the floor collapsed beneath her feet. The quiet horror of it all crept into her bones like a slow freeze, and with it came an overwhelming sense of fury, betrayal, and heartbreak. She had allowed Kai into her world. Allowed herself to hope, to rely on someone outside the chaos, and now that hope had turned into a weapon in Drew's hands. Kai had unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, become a thread in Drew's web of control, deceit, and manipulation. And that web now stretched across Port Charles with terrifying precision. Drew had always known how to exploit weakness, to twist truths into narratives that served only him, and with Jacinda's mysterious return, his obsession had found fresh oxygen. He would stop at nothing to dominate the story of her reappearance, to control who knew what and when. And now, with Kai acting as his eyes and ears, Drew had an advantage that shifted the entire game. But what he didn't count on was the storm that betrayal would ignite inside Trina. Because this wasn't the same girl he once overlooked. This was a woman forged in fire and loss, and now fueled by the betrayal of someone she trusted. Trina didn't lash out impulsively. Instead, she let the rage simmer beneath the surface like a volcano gathering pressure. She re-examined every moment, every conversation with Kai, what he had asked, what he hadn't said. What she had foolishly revealed without suspecting it would be handed directly to her enemy. She could no longer afford to play the game as she had before. There was no space left for innocence or assumption. From here on, she would operate in shadows of her own. Quietly, deliberately, she began tracking the damage. Drew had already made subtle moves in court, leveraging facts he shouldn't have known. He had begun reshaping public perception of Jacinda. Feeding media outlets selective truths to bury his own sins and frame her as unstable. Trina could see the foundation of a new war forming. And it terrified her how close they were to losing control of everything. But it wasn't just Trina who would suffer. Jacinda's fragile reintegration into Port Charles society was already teetering on the edge. Every move she made was being monitored, judged, and dissected. With Drew manipulating Kai's intel, Jacinda was vulnerable in ways she hadn't anticipated. Trina knew that if they didn't act quickly, if they didn't stop Drew from further corrupting the truth, then Jacinda's freedom, her very sense of self, would be shattered beyond repair. And Trina refused to let that happen. She would not let another woman be destroyed by the same machine that nearly broke her. So she confronted Kai, not in public, not with words that could be twisted, but in a private confrontation that would haunt him for days. She demanded answers. She exposed what she knew. She let him see the pain in her eyes. The devastation of knowing that everything she had shared in confidence had been turned into ammunition. Kai was stunned, perhaps even ashamed, but the damage was done. Trina didn't wait for apologies. She didn't need them. What she needed was resolve, clarity, and a plan. And so she turned away from Kai, not out of weakness, but out of the determination to fight without compromise. Trina rallied her allies, those she knew she could trust implicitly. Jocelyn, who had long ago learned that the truth was often a blade hidden behind a smile. Spencer, who had seen firsthand the cost of betrayal. Even Ava, whose sharp instincts and unapologetic pragmatism made her an invaluable weapon in times like these. Together, they began crafting a counterstrike. Piecing together the evidence that would expose Drew's manipulation, neutralize Kai's influence, and protect Jacinda from being buried under the weight of false narratives. But they knew time was running out. Drew was accelerating. He had begun circling Sunny, pressuring allies, seeking access to powerful platforms to elevate his version of events. And as he grew bolder, Trina realized that this wasn't just about Jacinda anymore. Drew wanted control over everything, public opinion, court decisions, even the legacy of those he'd wronged. His alliance with Sidwell and others in positions of influence made him more dangerous than ever. But it also made him predictable. Trina and her circle began leaking misinformation, baiting Drew into traps, and planting seeds of doubt within his own network. If they couldn't stop him legally, they would unravel him socially, strip away his allies until he was exposed as the manipulative predator he had always been. Meanwhile, Trina worked with Laura and Curtis to quietly reinforce Jacinda's legal protections, reinforcing restraining orders, seizing control of medical records, and securing safe housing to shield her from Drew's looming shadow. Every move they made had to be calculated, every decision a defense against the oncoming storm. Trina had become a strategist. A survivor, a woman no longer willing to let others dictate the fate of those she loved. And in the quiet hours of the night, when doubt tried to creep in, she reminded herself of everything she had endured, of everything they had all survived, and let it fortify her resolve. Kai's betrayal had changed her. Not just because it hurt, but because it revealed how fragile peace truly was. It had opened her eyes to the lengths her enemies would go to reclaim control. And it had reminded her that trust, once broken, could become the most dangerous weapon of all. The battle for Jacinda's truth was only just beginning. Drew was a powerful opponent, cunning and well-resourced. But Trina had something he didn't: conviction, allies, and the memory of every scar he had left behind. She would not stop. Not now. Not ever. And as the darkness gathered once more over Port Charles, Trina vowed that she would be the light that exposed the truth, no matter how painful, no matter the cost. Rocco had always been observant, more than anyone in his family gave him credit for. Growing up under the protective eyes of Lulu and Dante, he had learned to detect the subtle pauses in their conversations. The way their expressions would tighten every time someone mentioned Brit or the past. He had asked questions, polite at first, then persistent, but the answers never came. Instead, there were half smiles, vague reassurances, and diversions to safer topics. At first, Rocco accepted these deflections as part of the adult world he wasn't supposed to understand. But as he matured, those evasions started to gnaw at him. There was something deeply wrong, a fundamental truth that had been kept from him for years, and now he couldn't unfeel the weight of that omission. The catalyst came quietly, like most seismic shifts in a young person's life. Rocco overheard a late-night argument between Dante and Lulu, heated, desperate, full of words not meant for his ears. Britt's name came up. So did phrases like real mother, she had a right to know, and we should have told him sooner. Rocco froze outside the doorway. The world suddenly spinning in a different direction. His pulse quickened, his mouth went dry, and the reality he had always trusted cracked wide open. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every moment of his childhood recontextualized, every memory now suspect. By the next morning, he had made his decision. He packed a small bag, just essentials. Some clothes, cash he had secretly saved, a few photos, and a notebook where he had written down details he remembered from past conversations, subtle hints, timelines that never made sense. He didn't leave a note. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't want another excuse or half-truth. He didn't want a desperate message from his parents begging him to come home before he found out the truth for himself. He needed answers, real ones. And he needed to find them on his own terms. When Lulu walked into Rocco's room and found the bed empty, the window slightly ajar, and his backpack gone, a primal scream ripped from her chest. Panic surged through her veins. Her fingers trembled as she called Dante, who was already driving over after feeling something was off from their tense conversation the night before. Within minutes, both parents were in the house. The silence between them now replaced by frantic whispers and tearful realizations. They had known this day might come. They just hadn't expected it so soon. They had always assumed they had time to explain things to Rocco gently, when he was ready. But children don't wait for readiness. They react to truth, or its absence. The PCPD was contacted immediately, but Dante knew that standard procedures wouldn't be enough. Rocco was smart, resourceful, and emotionally driven. He would have covered his tracks. Chosen locations tied to whatever fragments of the truth he had gathered. It wasn't a matter of finding a runaway. It was a matter of intercepting a boy on a mission to rewrite his identity. A boy now convinced that his entire life had been a lie. Meanwhile, Rocco found himself navigating unfamiliar parts of Port Charles with a clarity he had never felt before. His heart ached. But his determination overrode fear. Every clue mattered, old photographs in the archives, a visit to the hospital where he had been born, and eventually, a plan to confront Britt herself. He knew she was back. He had seen her from a distance one afternoon outside GH and had felt a strange pull. At the time, he couldn't explain it. Now it made sense. There was something in her eyes. Something that mirrored his own. And if what he suspected was true, he needed to hear it from her lips. Not from his parents. Not from Jason. Not from anyone else. Back at home, Lulu spiraled into guilt, blaming herself for every decision they made to protect Rocco. Dante tried to remain the calm one, but even he was unraveling. The possibility that Britt might confirm to Rocco what they had buried for years, that she was, in fact, his biological mother, was now an inevitability. And once that happened, they feared Rocco would never trust them again. Not as parents. Not as family. Elsewhere, Britt was dealing with her own storm. Her return to Port Charles was already complicated by Jason's distant behavior. The fallout of her own secrets, and the weight of what she had lost. But learning that Rocco was on his way to find her, that he had pieced things together, shook her to the core. She wasn't ready to be a mother, not then, not now. But she also couldn't lie to him. Not like everyone else had. The encounter, when it happened, was heartbreaking. Rocco found Britt sitting by the docks, her eyes on the horizon, unaware of the storm that was walking toward her in the form of a confused, angry, determined boy. He stood silently for a moment. Then stepped forward and asked the only question that mattered, "Is it true?" Britt turned, her face pale, her eyes wide with sorrow. She didn't deny it. She simply nodded, and with that gesture, the axis of Rocco's world shifted permanently. In that moment, the threads of every family in Port Charles seemed to tighten, twist, and threaten to snap. Lulu and Dante were no longer just parents trying to do their best. They were keepers of a lie that had exploded. Britt was no longer just the returnee, she was now central to a new emotional earthquake. And Rocco, once just a boy caught between legacies, had taken his first step into becoming a young man forged by truth and betrayal. Under the dim haze of an overcast Port Charles sky, tension was more than just a feeling, it was a living, breathing thing that crept into every shadow and echoed down the corridors of General Hospital. Anna knew this sensation well, but as she walked quietly into the living room where Emma sat motionless, she realized this wasn't the typical political intrigue or intelligence maneuvering she had once mastered. This was personal. This was about Emma, her granddaughter, who had always been a beacon of strength, decency, and quiet resolve. But today, that strength looked diminished. Clouded by something Anna hadn't seen in her eyes in years, fear. Emma sat curled in the farthest corner of the couch, her knees drawn to her chest. Her eyes glazed as if her mind was 1,000 miles away. She barely looked up when Anna entered, and that alone told Anna everything she needed to know. Something was deeply wrong. And Anna already had a name for it, Jocelyn. What had started weeks ago as petty academic disagreements had escalated into something much more insidious, a calculated emotional assault disguised in teenage rivalry. And Emma, caught in the crossfire of Jocelyn's unraveling and unchecked manipulations, was starting to lose her footing. Anna sat beside her, offering no lecture, no analysis, just presence. It was then, under the weight of silence, that Emma finally cracked. Her voice trembled as she whispered how exhausted she was, how the tension with Jocelyn was no longer confined to hallways and whispered insults. It had seeped into her dreams, her classes, her very sense of self. Jocelyn, once a friend, had transformed into a force Emma didn't understand. She wasn't simply mean, she was erratic, intense, fueled by something much darker than mere jealousy. Emma had tried everything, reasoning, retreat, avoidance, but nothing stopped the passive-aggressive jabs, the icy stares, the subtle sabotage. Anna's heart ached. She had faced hardened criminals, double agents, and terrorist threats, but this, watching someone she loved unravel under psychological pressure delivered not with violence, but with manipulation, was a different kind of horror. She pulled Emma into a gentle embrace, stroking her hair as the tears came. "You're not weak," Anna whispered, "you're human. And you don't have to carry this alone." Through muffled sobs, Emma confessed that she didn't understand why Jocelyn hated her so much. Was it because of Dalton? Because of Jason's loyalty? Or something deeper, some insecurity in Jocelyn that Emma had accidentally exposed just by existing? Anna didn't pretend to have the answers. Instead, she reminded Emma that monsters often hide behind pretty faces and perfect smiles, and just because someone looks put together doesn't mean they're not spiraling inside. But what terrified Emma more than Jocelyn's aggression was her own response. She found herself shrinking, second-guessing every word she said, every outfit she wore, every person she confided in. She was becoming someone else, someone quieter, someone less visible. And that's when Anna knew they had reached a tipping point. Because psychological warfare, especially among young women raised in privilege and pressure, often goes undetected until the damage is irreversible. Anna promised Emma they would not ignore this. She told her she didn't have to be the bigger person if it meant being the silent victim. And if Jocelyn wanted to play these games, she would no longer be allowed to do it unchecked. Anna would speak to Laura. She would dig deeper. If Jocelyn was spiraling, if her unresolved grief over Morgan or anger towards Sunny was manifesting in cruelty toward Emma, then it had to be stopped. Not just for Emma's sake, but for Port Charles itself. And Emma, hearing her grandmother speak not just as a protector but as someone who believed her, felt a spark of herself return. She would no longer stay silent. She would face Jocelyn, not with revenge, but with strength. And if Jocelyn pushed her again, she would push back. Because now she remembered who she was. Emma Scorpio Drake. Daughter of heroes. Granddaughter of warriors. She would not be broken. Little did either of them know that while they spoke, Jocelyn was already plotting her next move. Enraged by rumors that Anna had visited Emma, and increasingly paranoid that her influence was slipping, Jocelyn began planting stories, about Emma's instability, about Jason's favoritism. About fabricated secrets she claimed Emma was hiding. She wasn't just fighting for power anymore. She was fighting to preserve the lie that she had everything under control. But Anna had been watching. She had been listening. And now, she was preparing. Because if Jocelyn wanted to play psychological chess, she'd forgotten she was up against a former WSB agent trained in counterintelligence. And Anna was ready.